Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? Hopefully it has cooled down where you are. That was one hell of a week. Thank you and welcome to Monday Night Live. Let me close out my Outlook here so that doesn't make any problems anymore. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. We didn't do one last month because the first Monday of last month was on the 4th of July. You all had better things to be doing than hanging out with me. I appreciate it. I want to thank all of you guys too, by the way. Earlier today, Washington gun law passed 60,000 subscribers. That's 60,000. That's pretty awesome. I never thought that we would be able to grow a channel primarily dedicated to Washington gun law out to that. So thank you to all of you. You guys are the ones that really help this channel grow. So thank you to everyone. So few things I want to talk about tonight real quick, and then we're going to get into your questions. So as people are joining us, thanks for those of you just hopping in right now. Thanks a million for joining us. Okay, so topic number one, House Resolution 1808. I know a lot of people are freaking out about that. That is the assault weapon ban of 2022. And let's not kid ourselves what this piece of legislation does. It goes well beyond what we traditionally think of as an assault weapon ban, because it takes all of the types of weapons that are commonly associated as assault weapons. And I know we're not going to get into what is the correct vernacular, but most of your semi-automatic rifles, as well as a litany of other guns, and would reclassify all of them as semi-automatic assault weapons. So you would have firearms off the AR platform, the AK platform, the AR and AR pistol platforms, handgun platforms, shotgun platforms, that would be considered unlawful semi-automatic firearms, and then, of course, would ban all of those. Now, as we know, this did pass out of the House by a narrow margin. There were 2 Republicans, in fact, who voted for this legislation. There were 5 Democrats who voted against it. And I think when you take a look at where they are each individually in election situations, you begin to understand how the principles go out the window when re-election is up. So it's gotten out of the cuckoo's nest now, and it has passed, but it kind of goes to the grown-ups table now, okay? So it left the kids' table, and now it's going to the grown-ups table, which is the United States Senate. Now, I recognize that some of you don't have a lot of faith in a few of these senators based upon some other gun legislation that was passed. This bill is going to need 60 votes out of the United States Senate. So every Democrat would have to hold the line on this, and 10 Republicans would need to defect. I don't think that they're going to get every Democrat to hold the line, and I certainly do not think they're going to get 10 Republicans to defect. And so I don't believe that House Resolution 1808, the shittiest piece of gun legislation ever written, has really a snowball's chance of becoming law. If it were to become law, yes, under the very clear rules announced years ago in Heller and years ago in McDonald and most recently in Bruin, no, this legislation could not really ever stand any type of a constitutional scrutiny. So that's the one thing I wanted to talk to you about on HR 1808. That's the legislation right there. And listen, if you're surprised that it came it came out of the House, if you look at the number of sponsors and co-sponsors on the bill alone, there was almost enough sponsors of the bill to pass the legislation. So that gives you an idea that the fix was in a little bit in the House of Representatives. Okay, now the other thing I want you guys to pay attention to, and I just did a video on this, and I don't want you to pay attention to the video. I mean, I do want you to pay attention to the video, but I want you to pay attention to some of this data here that comes in from the Crime in Washington 2021 annual report from the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, because what we see here is a massive escalation in violent and property crime throughout the state of Washington. Now, the overall picture is that the crime is down in Washington based on the number of arrests, okay, not based on the number of crimes. This is a data that is based on how many people are being arrested. So when you quit arresting every felony drug possession anywhere in the state of Washington, you can imagine how many your arrests have shrunk exponentially. And then, of course, when you defund your local police departments, that doesn't help with the numbers either. But recognizing that there was a massive increase in 2020 in both property and violent crimes, in 2021, we find that yet there has still been an increase in violent crimes, sexual crimes, property crimes, and there's a crime clock in there that tells you how frequently some of these crimes are being committed. And it's alarming. Now, why do I bring it to our attention? For two reasons. Number one, you guys are all lawful and responsible gun owners, and you want to protect yourself and your family, and God bless you for all of that. You need to be aware of this. The second big reason is that every time a piece of gun control legislation has been sold to the Washington public, it has been sold on the fact that it was going to save lives. If we go back to 2014, we remember the first big push, Initiative 594, which was going to close the gun show loophole, because that was the big problem. That's why we had people dying. Fast forward to 2018, we had Initiative 1639, perhaps one of the most controversial initiatives ever to come through, with a litany of subject matter in that for whatever reason that passed constitutional scrutiny, but a $30 card tab bill or initiative didn't. But I digress. But that too was sold to us exclusively because, well, it was going to save lives. Okay. Well, then fast forward to this past legislative session that we just got through. Okay. You had House Bill 1630, going to have all new restrictions on various places where we can no longer carry firearms and no longer defend ourselves or our family. We're going to have House Bill 1705, which is going to rid society of the scourge of untraceable firearms without any data to suggest that we have a problem with untraceable firearms here in the state of Washington. And then, of course, the most controversial bill of all of them was 5078, which was a magazine restriction, which, again, that was going to save lives. Well, you know, listen, when we look at the data from the people who know the best, that is law enforcement, the ones that actually are tasked with protecting our communities, we're not saving lives. The amount of murders and homicides are going up exponentially. And so once again, the people on the political left, and I'm sorry to get political here, but those on the political left, the gun grabbers on the left, have lied, as they typically do, about what these bills are about. These bills, they call them gun control measures. It has nothing to do with the guns. It has everything to do with the control. And we have another video that we just did where we took a look at United States federal data on the types of people who are committing gun crimes. And watch that video, because it very clearly shows that while the problem is over here, we keep passing laws as if somehow or another the problem is over here and restricting you, the lawful and responsible gun owner. Speaking of which, the third thing I wanted to mention is the myth of the good guy with a gun has proven to not be a myth at all. So congratulations to Elijah Dickens, the young man in Indiana who was able to stop a mass shooter. Now, the mass shooter was able to claim 4 victims, which is terrible. I think several other people were wounded. But had Mr. Dickens not been there and been willing to take action and been so proficient with his use of the firearm, God only knows how bad this situation would have been. Now, those on the left were, of course, quick to decry Mr. Dickens because he violated the mall policy by bringing that firearm there. Not to mention, though, of course, the mass shooter had violated the same policy. Thank God for Mr. Dickens doing that. And again, that gives to show us the difference between gun-free zones, areas in Washington state where the legislature said, listen, you can't have a gun here. If you have a gun here, you're breaking the law. You're subject to criminal liability. And those that have no guns allowed, private businesses with private policies, okay? So check out the information on that. The other thing, two last things. Form 4999, okay? I know there's going to be a bunch of questions on here about Form 4999, the ATF rule on pistol stabilizing braces. Now, as you know, that rule was pulled back and apparently is going to come back out in December. Okay, we're going to get a rewrite on what that rule means in December, which means if it's published in, it becomes effective 120 days later. So we're looking at an April 2023 implementation on that now. So recognizing that a ton of you have a ton of questions, I am starting a new video series. We're going to start it right after Labor Day. It's called Ask an FFL. And myself and one of the FFLs up at Security Gun Club in Woodinville, hello to all my friends at Security Gun Club, and check out the promos we're doing for them on some of our videos. But we're going to sit down and we're going to go through each section of 4999 with a fine-tooth comb with an FFL so that all of you and all of us can try to make sense of what the hell this all means And again, my job here is to give you the information. What you choose to do with it, whether you choose to comply with the law or not comply with the law, that's for you to decide. Now, I encourage you to comply with the law. And my caveat is I will explain to you what the law says they will do to you if you don't. What you do with this information, again, this is last time I checked, a free country. You get to do what you want to do. The final thing, and this goes to the Woodsman 1983. I know you had a question up here early, and I want to get this answered. A lot of you have been asking, hey, what's up with the magazine ban in Washington State? What's up with the lawsuit? Great question. Serendipity here. Timing is everything. Because tomorrow I am taping an interview with Joel Ard. Who's Joel Ard? Well, Joel Ard happens to be Sullivan's lead attorney in the matter of Sullivan v. Ferguson. Joel is a local Second Amendment attorney. Now, Joel has also associated a big hit in law firm from Washington, D.C. that handles a lot of major appellate litigation. Their resume is pretty darn impressive, actually. So we're going to hear from, I'm going to tape the interview tomorrow, probably have it out before the week is out. And that will be an update directly from the horse's mouth about what's going on with Sullivan v. Ferguson, which is the lawsuit in the Western District of Washington challenging Washington's magazine ban. Now, before we went live, I went and looked online to the dockets to see what was going on. And apparently there now is a similar case filed in the Eastern District of Washington where somebody else has filed suit against the state to enjoin them from enforcing the magazine ban. And I have a feeling that there's going to be a motion to consolidate these matters, which gets us to the last point, which is, where do I think all of this is going? Well, if you take a look at what the very clear rule of law in Bruin that was announced, and then you take a look at what the Supreme Court did with 4 cases that they had sitting on certiorari. And for those of you who hadn't checked out the video on it, this is a quick summary. When you're sitting on a writ of certiorari, you're asking to be put on the guest list. You want to get an invite to come to the Supreme Court. 9 out of 10 cases get a thanks but no thanks, and that means the ruling of the lower court stands, okay? And that is how most of these crazy gun control pieces of legislation remain constitutionally valid, is some circuit court applies some watered-down analysis on it, and then the Supreme Court, for whatever reason, decides, we're just not going to deal with it, and so the lower court holds. And Justice Thomas has consistently authored dissenting opinions when review was not granted about what's going on here. Why are we not addressing the Second Amendment? Why is it being treated like the redheaded stepchild here? So that's really, really critical here, okay? And when the Supreme Court GVR'd all 4 of these cases, and that is basically they granted review, okay? They said, yeah, we're going to accept review. We're going to vacate, the V is vacate. We're going to vacate the ruling of the lower court, but we're going to remand it back down there for an order for a new hearing. Basically, it's a do-over, which is the Supreme Court's way of saying, hey, either you guys fix this or we're going to have to fix it for you. Now, one of the cases was Young v. Hawaii, which deals with Hawaii's total BS concealed carry laws. We're not going to bore ourselves with that. But the other 3 cases we should pay attention to, okay? The first is a case called Bianchi v. Frosch. That deals with Maryland's AR ban. Okay, Maryland banned ARs a few years ago. And why do we need to pay attention to that? Because our Attorney General is barking up that tree quite heavily right now. Okay, so we need to be careful about that. The one we really need to pay attention of, and we've done videos on this case, is Duncan v. Bonta. And then there's a companion case, New Jersey Pistol and Rifle Association v. Bruck. Those are California and New Jersey's magazine ban, okay? And the Supreme Court has sent, which they were upheld, the 9th, and I think Jersey might be in the 4th Circuit, but don't hold me accountable on that one. Bonta obviously came out of the 9th Circuit. When the courts ruled that, both of those courts had ruled that that is constitutional, that when we do this 2-part balancing test, the society's need to protect from mass shooters outweighs the individual infringement, and therefore it stands. The United States Supreme Court has said, hey, that 2-part test is really cute, but it's 1 part too many. It's a 1-part test. Does it infringe on the Second Amendment? If it does, it's unconstitutional. So it's possible. Is it possible that the 9th Circuit could issue a new opinion in Duncan v. Bonta and say, based upon the Supreme Court's clear rule of law, this violates the Second Amendment, and therefore California's magazine ban is hereby struck down. Yeah, that could happen. It should, actually. And would that have a snowball effect? Well, yes, because that would apply to any jurisdiction in the Ninth Circuit, which Washington is. So those are my opening points. Only took 15 minutes. Good. Now, question of the day before I start getting to the questions from you guys, okay? And here is the question of the day. I think that there may be a problem with RCW 9.41.010 subsection 21, the definition of loaded, okay? Why do I think that there might be a problem with the definition of loaded? Let me explain why. Loaded means any of the following, okay? There is a cartridge in the chamber of the firearm. Okay, I think we can all agree that's a loaded firearm. But take a look at how they describe how you define a loaded semi-automatic handgun, okay? Cartridges are in a clip that is locked in place in the firearm, okay? Cartridges are in a clip that is locked in place in the firearm. And then C is, cartridges in the cylinder of a revolver. D, cartridges in a tube or magazine that's part of the firearm. And then there's some other stuff about muzzle loaders. I'm not going to bore you with all that. Let's talk about 21B. Cartridges are in a clip that is locked in place in the firearm. Now, the rule of law is you use the plain language of a statute when interpreting its mean, unless it is subject to more than one interpretation. I know a lot about firearms, but I never have claimed to be this firearm expert. There's plenty of other people out here in the YouTubeverse who are firearm experts. But I do know this. The term clip and magazine is used interchangeably by people who do not know what they're talking about, such as perhaps politicians, okay? But clip and magazine, to anyone who even has a rudimentary understanding of firearms, has a significant difference, okay? And I went and did a little research, and there were some World War II era firearms in which the rounds would be loaded into a clip, and the clip itself would be dropped into an internal magazine. And once the last round was discharged, the clip would be expelled from the firearm for another clip to be loaded in, okay? But any modern firearm does not use a clip. Any of you or semi-automatic handguns that any of you are carrying, regardless of the magazine size, we don't talk about the clip size. We talk about the magazine size. Magazine and clips have a very specific and different meaning to anyone with a rudimentary firearm. Does that exclude magazines from this statute? I don't believe that a judge would see it that way, but the argument could be made. My question for all of you good folks out there is, what do you think? Would that mean that if you took a magazine and just inserted it into the mag well, didn't rack the slide, didn't chamber around, does that constitute a loaded firearm? I have told everyone for years, yes, it most certainly does, because I had gone on the interpretation that's in here. But the more I thought about it, the more I looked at the language, and I really realized this weekend as I was preparing a PowerPoint, is like, why did they use the term clip instead of magazine? I don't know. Does it make a difference? Should it make a difference? Question of the day. Let's see how you guys do. Okay, let's get to some questions. I do not have my super chat up, so maybe next month we'll do a super chat. And I do want to hear down here in the description box from you guys if any of you would be interested in doing a live chat exclusively on gun trusts, okay? And I'm building out some things in the practice to help with gun trust, and I want to get a couple of those built out. So we're probably looking at after Labor Day. But if you guys are interested in learning more about gun trusts, and you're not anxious enough that you need to call me right away, then if you're interested in a live chat exclusively on that, let me know down here, and we'll set something up, okay? All right. Gray clouds. It seems like the Washington Constitution, Section 34 or whatever, is in opposition to the Second Amendment somewhat. It seems to open a door in the group as what is an armed body of men. Yeah, I know a lot of you have been caught up on this conversation of armed bodies of men and militia, and I don't want to get too far down that road for a couple of reasons. Number one, when we look at the Second Amendment, only the gun grabbers say, well, militia is conditioned precedent to the individual having a right. Well, If that were the case, then why would the founding fathers have used the right of the individual to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed? Okay. Secondly, the Heller case went through a god ton of analysis, historical and otherwise, to prove why that is not the case. In the Washington State Constitution, Article 1, Section 24, it says the right of the individual to keep and bear arms in defense of themselves or the state shall not be infringed, but nothing in this section shall allow something like an armed body of men to be formed. And I've done a video on that. I'd have to go back and pull up the link. But what that really does is, if you go back to the old Washington Territory and the coal wars that took place in central Washington, kind of around Cle Elum, Roslyn, and things like that. Yeah, these coal companies, when there were strikes and stuff, would put together armed bodies of men and go in and really break the strikes quite effectively. Add a racial component into some of the coal business, and you had armed bodies of men of various racial groups also getting done. And it was like the gangs of New York over there without New York. So that is why that is put in there. And there's some historical perspective. But I really do think that when we're getting down the road of what constitutes a militia, we're getting into an area that it's like the diversion tactic, or what we call in law school, the red herring. The militia, and unless you guys are looking to form militias, and, you know, I would caution on that. I would also say that the purpose of Washington gun law is not to help you guys form militias. I'm not saying I'm, against it. I'm not saying I'm for it. I'm just saying that from my legal practice standpoint, I don't think it's something that we're going to be able to help you out with. All right. What is an armed body? Gray Clouds, at least tell me what an armed body of men is. Well, it would be more than two men making a body of men who happen to be armed, I guess. I don't know. I really don't know. All right. So, Crash Bandit, DAs in San Francisco and LA did the same thing, claimed crime was down based off of arrest records. Yeah. Crash Bandit, you bring up a really good point, and actually bring up a larger point here. And this is something I do want all of you to be really, really conscientious about this fall. And that is progressive prosecutors. Okay. Now, as you know, Dan Satterberg, who is the King County prosecutor, for those of you in King County, is retiring. And so there's no incumbent running, and there are a couple people running. And I will probably do a video later on where we do some endorsements of various candidates for the bench, for prosecutors' offices, and things such as that. But you need to very, very carefully take a look at what their position on crime is, because no matter how good your police department is, okay, you could have the best police department on the planet, which in most of these blue cities you don't, because they've defunded them. But even if you did, your police department is only as effective as your prosecuting attorney. And of course, your prosecuting attorney's effectiveness is really based on how much do they want to hold people accountable. I had the great pleasure when I was a young lawyer coming up out of law school to get to work for Norm Mailing, who was the King County prosecutor forever and a day. And Norm ran an amazingly great office. It was an office of high ethics, high standards, high consistency, little to no politics in the office at all. I mean, it was a pleasure to have worked for Mr. Mailing. Mr. Satterberg runs his office a little different than Mr. Mailing. Candidly, I don't think anyone could be as effective as Norm was. But we're about to go through a major change here in King County with that prosecutor's office, and you need to be very careful attention to what's happening there, because these progressive prosecutors will absolutely ruin communities. The one in San Francisco was so progressive that they actually got recalled in San Francisco. So how bad is it? Okay. Yeah, August 2, last day to get your ballots out. Thank you, Jay. For those of you in the primaries, yeah, listen, pay careful attention. Now, I've been back and forth with Caleb Heinrich. Who's Caleb Heinrich? He's the chair of the Washington State Republican Party. We decided that we're going to wait until the primaries get done, kind of figure out what the races are, and we're going to do a video. Caleb is probably going to do a couple of videos with us. He agreed to do this, where we're going to talk about some of the races around the state, these local House races, local Senate races, where we think that there's a chance to flip a seat, okay? And many of you, I hope, have learned a very valuable lesson in the last year, which is oftentimes we are worried that our rights will be taken from us from the top down, okay? And so we focus up here all the time because they're going to take our rights from us up here. And I understand why we have the fear, especially when you see what the ATF and the Biden administration and what Inslee and all that does. I totally recognize that. But if you don't pay attention to what's happening down here also, they will erode your rights from the bottom up. And what happened in the state legislature is a product of the Democrats out campaigning Republicans in various jurisdictions in the state of Washington and getting a large majority. You got to remember that there were a few Democrats that still voted against 5078 and a couple of these other bills, especially 5078. There were a few Democrats who did cross over and vote against it. I don't know if it's possible to flip the state back the other way, at least not in the year 2022, but can we get this down to a much more manageable majority for the Democrats? We most certainly can. The Democrats are running on nothing right now. And this is a year where, listen, kick in some dough, help some of these local races out. We're going to talk about some of these races because we think there's a big impact that we can have at the state level. We think there's an impact that can happen on the national level. Reagan Dunn, King County, middle of the road Republican, is running against Dr. Kim Schreier. That is a huge, huge, huge race, okay? And that is a winnable race for the GOP in this state. It's an odd district that zigzags back and forth across the Cascades. It's a very weird district. But listen, this is Jennifer Dunn's kid. He's been a King County council member forever. This guy's a legitimate politician with good policy. He's got a chance. Over in the 4th legislative district, you have Dan Newhouse, the incumbent, who voted to impeach Trump, who's got all sorts of other Republicans running against them in the primaries, including Lauren Culp, who was the last GOP nominee for governor. So that primary is going to be really interesting to watch over there. I think, obviously, whoever wins the primary wins the general. Ed Kemper, Bill, would love to hear what you have about the ATF pulling all this immoral and illegal acts of late. Okay. Well, first of all, the immoral and illegal acts of the ATF as of late is only the latest chapter in a long, long, long list of things that the ATF has done similar to this. There is a case out there, and we did a video on this, and I really think that as much as everyone is talking about Bruen and what Bruen means, and Bruen was a huge, huge win for the Second Amendment, okay? Huge, okay? People need to pay more attention to West Virginia versus EPA, okay? The EPA got a horrific smackdown, and they got it because they basically had been stepping out of their lane for a number of years, enforcing policies, implementing new policies and regulations that essentially was significantly changing American commerce. The problem is that when you make those types of significant changes, that needs to be through legislative action. Oh, does that sound familiar? Yeah, because that's exactly what the damn ATF has been doing for years. So take a look at this case. It's West Virginia versus Environmental Protection Agency. Came out a couple of days. We got a video on YouTube about it. So if you don't want to geek out on it yourself, let me do it for you. But basically, what the court said is, listen, when we come to these major question doctrines, something that so significantly affects industry and commerce, we're not going to allow these alphabet agencies to dictate new policies and enforce new policies. We're going to actually require the legislature to pass new laws because, see, that's how the separation of powers works, okay? You want to make laws, that comes out of an Article 1 branch of government. The enforcement of the laws comes out of the Article 2 branch of government, which in this case was the EPA, or in our case is the ATF. They get to enforce the laws. They don't get to create the laws. They don't even get to interpret the laws. The interpretation of laws is up to the Article 3 branch of government, or what we call the judiciary, okay? So these major question doctrines, what the court said is no more of this. From here on out, if it's a major question under this doctrine, the legislature has to make the changes, okay? What does that mean to the ATF? Well, it means that suddenly if you want to, I don't know, go out and reclassify 25 million otherwise legal firearms called AR pistols into all unlawful and federally regulated SBRs, $25,200,000 a pop, that's a pretty significant amount of tax revenue for the United States being decided upon without legislative fiat. That's going to be a problem. And so one of the reasons that I think that the ATF pulled its stabilizing brace rule back is I think they had a little bit of an oh shit moment. Like, can we do all of this? Now, will that stop them? It should. Will it? Yeah, probably not. Okay, it's the ATF, but it's a good question. That's why I really think that that's my personal views on the ATF. Okay, and now that I said that, I'll probably get a visit from them. Yeah, okay. Crash Bandit. Braden from Langley Outdoor Academy did one on Brazil, and their president made it easier to get guns, and homicides with guns went down. Okay, first of all, Braden over at Langley Outdoor Academy actually does a really good job. I like his videos. I like his style. I like his approach. He talks. I mean, just really approachable in the way he does his videos. So if you guys haven't checked out what he's doing over there, check him out. Langley Outdoor Academies. He does really good stuff. Yeah. So the president of Brazil went out and gave Brazilians much more freedoms, including the right to protect themselves. And Brazil, which is a country that has a significant crime problem and a significant organized crime problem, has suddenly seen a rapid decrease in violent crime. Shocking. And so, yeah, Crash Bandit, that is a great question. It's a great point. And I've always said, hey, listen, if you really wanted to change the Second Amendment debate in this country forever, arm every single soccer mom for about 6 months. Just arm them, let them protect their family that way. And then 6 months later, start talking about taking the gun away from them. Okay. And see what they have to say. All right. The blog, what are the chances of the assault weapon ban getting through the Senate? The blog, you probably joined us a little late. It was kind of in my opening comments. But for those of you who did join us late, I know a lot of you are freaking out about House Resolution 1808. It did pass out of the funny farm. It came out of the House of Reps. It's sitting at the grown-up table now in the Senate. In order to pass out of the Senate, it needs 60 votes. There's exactly a 50-50 split right now in the Senate. So in order for this bill to pass, it would require every single Democrat in the Senate to hold firm, including Manchin and Sinema. And then it would require 10 Republicans to vote for it. So what is the likelihood that they're going to get all 50 Democrats to hold? I don't think it's that likely, but possible. What's the likelihood that they're going to get a couple of Republicans to flip? Oh, they probably will. They probably will. What's the chance that they're going to get 10 of them? I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell they get 10. I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell they get close to 10. And so I really do think that the bill is dead on arrival. Could I be wrong? Yeah, of course I could be wrong. Crazier things have happened. But in this form as written, no, I don't think it has any chance of getting out. If it were to be passed in the law, it would be an amazing foot race to see how many lawyers would file a lawsuit right away and see who could get it up to the Supreme Court the fastest, okay? Because it would not stand constitutional muster. When you're banning about 80 to 90% of the common firearms in circulation today, that's not gonna fly. All right. Audio workshops talking about, if you guys want to know some of the other channels I watch, okay, just so, yeah, because you guys are talking about some other channels. I do watch Yankee Marshall. I know he's a local guy, and that's probably one of the reasons I have interest. I find his videos to be immensely entertaining. I don't always agree with his views. I sometimes agree quite a bit, but he justifies his position exceptionally well. And like I say, I just find him to be amazingly entertaining. Okay. We talked about Braden at Langley Outdoor Academies. I do watch a lot of his videos. I watched Armed Scholar. I think the delivery of the material is really dry, and I can see why a lot of people would find it maybe a little boring. I'm a law geek myself, so I can geek out on it. I find that to be exciting and interesting. But the quality of the information that he's putting out at Armed Scholar there is really, really good. So those are the three that I typically make it a point to watch as far as 2A issues go. There are some other people on that I do try to watch regularly. Matt Walsh, I love everything that comes from Matt Walsh. So I just so you guys know. Anyways, like that matters. All right. Elijah Dickens, the new John Wick Dickens. Yeah. And there's a new drill that's being, for those of you who, in fact, I taught a class with an NRA instructor this past weekend up at Shooting Sports Northwest in Mill Creek. Frank Shields, if you're out there, for those of you, hey, awesome indoor facility there too, Shooting Sports Northwest. But anyways, one of the drills they were working on was the Dickens drill. And the Dickens drill is you shoot a target from 40 yards. You got 10 shots. The idea is you got to hit it at least 8 times. Now, the thing they were doing is they were allowing the shooters to brace themselves against the wall of the bay to do this shot, because I understand that Mr. Dickens had braced himself up against a pillar or some type of support, which is fantastic work on his part. Okay, it does make the shot a little easier. It would keep me from maybe falling over because I'd be freaking out. I mean, what this young man pulled off is nothing short of a miracle when you consider that he'd only apparently had the firearm for a couple months, was not particularly well trained. You can imagine the trauma going on. And candidly, I know some of you guys on this list right now that I could probably take to the range, and you couldn't hit that thing at 40 yards with one shot. Now, I know there's plenty of other on you here who would ting, ting, ting it all night, but that's pretty damn good shooting. So, yeah, and it's going to be really interesting to see when the kid finally comes out and starts doing interviews and things like that, and who's the first person to get him. Tucker Carlson, I'm sure, is shelling out some cash for that right now. But again, doesn't that show you the reason why we have good people with guns? And it also shows what happens if you have the audacity to violate a store policy, because there is a certain grocery chain very prominent here in the Puget Sound region that I shop at routinely that I know has a no firearm policy, and I don't care. And if they catch me, okay, that's fine. They can trespass me from their store. I will not shop there anymore. I will shop somewhere else, but that's just the way I am. Now, would I do the same if there's a gun-free zone and the statute says there can't be a firearm there? No, I wouldn't, because I don't really feel like getting arrested. And that's the difference between a gun-free zone and no guns allowed. So good on Mr. Dickens. All right, let's get the questions coming in, guys. I'm looking at a lot of chat here. Some Let's Go Brandons, which I'm always down with. Some Jerry G watches Coleon Noir. He's great. I do watch some of his videos. I probably should watch more. Again, as far as his ability to deliver the material in a concise way, I think he does a fantastic job. I think he's very passionate in the way he speaks and presents. And obviously he's making a lot of appearances on large media outlets. So obviously he's established himself as a really reliable spokesperson for these issues. So yeah, I think he does a fantastic job. Mr. Tarjays, there are not super chats available. If you got a question, fire it in right now, because I'm looking at it for it. Nick's response. I saw something here about Nick's response. There is an ongoing phenomenon where I have seen a lot of people lately who maybe had something 25 years ago, some juvie crap or something like that, and then thought they got it all cleared up, have since bought a dozen or more firearms using the same FFL, and now they go to buy firearm number 14, 10 years into it, and suddenly they're getting rejected. And I think there has been a massive catch-up in digital records. I think that there are a lot of gaps left in these records, and I think that in the past, the ATF's directive was, hey, listen, unless we can establish their ineligibility, proceed. Let them proceed. Now I think the ATF is being instructed, well, when in doubt, deny it. And so we're seeing this blanket denials on people. And then, of course, they get a letter from local law enforcement saying, well, you've been denied, and our records indicate you own 14 firearms, so you need to bring them all down to the station. Speaking of bringing firearms down to the station, you guys need to pay attention to 941, 810, 815, right up there. It's the very tail end section. New laws on if you are ordered to surrender firearms pursuant to a protection order, red flag order, no contact order, anti-harassment order, blah, blah, blah. There is a whole new litany of rules that really takes all the negotiations and ability to manage that completely out. And you need to be aware of what's going on. Not that I'm saying you guys are going to have orders to surrender firearms, but it does happen. And you need to be aware of that. I'm going to be doing a couple of videos on that. And so pay attention to those. Those will probably come out in a couple of weeks, but it's going to be all about the new laws of how you have to surrender firearms if you're ordered to do so. Junior Flores 9, thank you very much. I've been spending a lot of time in my swimming pool, so I got a little tan going. Oh, here we go. Andrew Schilling, I saw your vid on illegal weapons. How long ago have brass knuckles and butterfly and spring knives been illegal to own? I knew they were always not okay, but okay. So I don't know when that law came in. If you type the statute in, that's going to be RCW 9.41.190, I believe. you look down at the very bottom of the statute, it will tell you when the last enactment was. But listen, as far as I can remember, and I was prosecuting back in the late 90s, so I remember that law at least in the late 90s. So at least by then, okay? Charles Timmons talks about guns and gadgets. I like guns and gadgets. I do like guns and gadgets. Thank you for mentioning it. I think he does a great job. He obviously has nothing else going on other than his YouTube channel, because that dude can get on YouTube within 2 minutes of something happening. Sometimes I want to get on an issue like, there's a big Supreme Court case that comes out, but I'm a lawyer, so I actually have to go to court and crap like that during the day. And so sometimes I can't get to shooting videos until late in the afternoon. Then I got to go home and edit them up and make them look good for you guys. And so that's why I'm kind of late to the party on some things. Now, if I could actually get to the point where, I was only doing YouTube videos, then I'd be ready to do this on your beck and call. But, you can't monetize a channel and then, supplant a law practice that quickly. So, okay. Ed Kemper 9. Bill, who do you represent and why? Usually wish you were my lawyer, but I don't need one. Good. Ed Kemper, I hope you don't ever need a lawyer either. What do we do here at Washington Gun Law? This is not a plug for Washington Gun Law, because I'm going to move on from this. I primarily will deal with self-defense cases, anything of a criminal nature. I also draft gun trusts. I do have another lawyer here who does all of my restoration work. We will also do ATF appeals and issues related to FFLs. Lately, I have started working with private security companies and private schools in developing school policies for how to protect their kids. So there's a lot of different things that we can do here, but I hope you never need me, okay? Updates on the FRT from Ryan Berg. Ryan, thanks for joining us tonight too, by the way. And Ryan Johnson, greetings from Florida. Ryan Johnson, thanks for joining us all the way in Florida, because it is after almost 11 o'clock at night there, so I appreciate it. As far as the FRT goes, I am not aware of any other updates. That's a good thing. That's a good thing, because it means probably nothing's going on. Let me do some looking into that, and if there's anything worthy of that, Ryan, I will put a video out in the next week or so on that, because that is an issue that I know a lot of you have been. Now, for those of you who remember the trials and tribulations of Diversified Machine and the solvent trap issue, unfortunately, that did not end well for the individuals who were the president and CEO, COO of that company. They all recently pled to felonies and are now facing prison time. I did talk to a gentleman locally. For those of you who followed that solvent trap saga, I'd kind of broken everyone down into 3 categories. I said, hey, listen, there are some of you who just bought these things and you never did anything with it, and I'm not too worried about you. And then there was a few of you who had actually bought them and turned them into suppressors, but you'd actually done the Form 1s and gotten approval and all that. So I wasn't really too worried about them either, because the ATF had originally blessed you with it. What I was worried about was the people who, in fact, did mill them out, did turn them into suppressors, didn't do any paperwork. And I talked to a gentleman last week, sad story. He did it. He did it exactly the way I said, don't do it. He did it all before I did any of my videos. So, whatever. Okay. And so he effed up, right? And he ended up having to plead to a couple of felonies. He's got sentencing coming up in a month, and it's called an open rec, which means his defense attorney can ask for whatever, including no jail time. But my understanding is that the prosecution's asking for 24 months, 2 years in federal penitentiary for that. And this dude has no criminal history, spotless record until that, and just got caught up in all of the BS going on in 2020, and, got hit in face. Whoa, what is this? And started ordering a couple of them, and, just went down the wrong road. And but 24 months in prison, are we kidding? I mean, seriously. We got prison cells that can be used for better things than that. All right. So Ryan Berg, that's your FRT update for now. IT Christos, do you go by Bill or William? I've seen both in chat. Okay. I go by Bill everywhere except when I do my professional stuff. And then I go by William because my birth name is William Kirk. I'm William Kirk in court. I'm William Kirk professionally. If you guys talk to me on the phone, call me Bill. Okay. Don't call me Mr. Kirk though. Please do not do that. If you guys meet my dad, then you can call him Mr. Kirk. Jared Adams, what about plastic knuckles? Metal knuckles. It's metal knuckles. The material is metal knuckles. I imagine that with plastics, you could probably make a pretty good set of knuckles. So I'm just telling you what the statute says, okay? Okay, Jack Fern, William, regarding the ATF visiting a citizen's home, asking if the ATF agents present a valid warrant and search warrant, do we have to unlock safes, cases, or do things or request additional orders from the judge? Jack Fern, this is a great question. Let's talk about this. As you know, we got this thing kicking around where ATF went to a Delaware man's house because he had the audacity to buy more than 2 handguns. A form called 3310.4 gets filled out, sent to ATF. ATF could come by your house and ask to see the firearms. Remember this, anytime law enforcement is asking you for permission to do something, they are doing so because they don't have the legal authority to do it themselves, okay? If they're asking to come in the home, it's because they don't have any other legal method to get into the home. If they're asking to search the home, it's because they don't have a search warrant. If they're asking to see the guns, it's because they don't have the authority to see the guns on their own, okay? Do you have to comply with any of that? No, you don't. Should you comply with any of it? It is hard for me ever to advise somebody, yeah, sure, just cooperate with the police. Why? Because I know they're there on suspicion of something. Now, it could be nothing. It could be something really major, but that's not their mindset, okay? And so it's no lawyer is ever really going to tell you, yeah, cooperate with them. Yeah, talk to them. What's the harm? There could be a lot of harm, okay? There are 2 forms that can be presented to you. One is a 3400.1, which is a voluntary waiver of forfeiture and notice and all of that stuff. That form should never, ever, ever, ever be signed because you're basically saying, yeah, you can have my stuff and you can destroy it or use it as evidence against me or whatever you want to do. There's also a form called 3400.23. If they do seize items, you should want to make sure there's a direct accounting on 3400.23. And you want to make sure you sign that because that is an acknowledgement of this is the crap that was taken from me. And you want to make sure it is very clear and concise. Okay. That is a good question. If you have a search warrant, if the search warrant asks to search the home, they get to search the home. If the search warrant is the home and any safes, and it specifically mentions firearm safes, are you required to open them? Well, one way or the other, the safe's getting open. Okay, if they have a search warrant for the safe, one way or the other, the safe's getting open. So either you can open it for them, or they will do it through some other method. Okay, but yes, they would have the right to search the safe if it's articulated in the warrant. If they have a search warrant, there's nothing you guys can really do. The time to fight the legitimacy of the search warrant will be later on in court, but it's not going to be in the home at the time the warrant is being executed. I know that's not what you guys want to hear, but that's the legal advice that I'm giving you. So that is a really, really good question. That was from Jack Fern. Jack, thanks for that. DJ Drac. If your gun trust is also a religious organization, in theory, it should be more protected because government is very afraid of persecuting churches, etc. A gun trust would never be set up from a church. A gun trust could be set up for a church. And I don't know why a church would necessarily do this. Well, I could get into lots of reasons, but let's not get too far down that road. But remember, on a trust, you're going to have an individual grantor who is the creator of the trust, and then trustees and beneficiaries. And we can go down that road. I've resisted doing videos because I know if I do a couple of videos, the phone's going to blow up about gun trusts, and I just want to have the infrastructure in place before I do that. So I'm working on that right now, okay? And once I get that, all right. Jay Stevenson, is there an issue ordering Sig P320 365 grip modules and having them shipped here with the most recent law that took effect? If we're talking about just extra grips, any kind of an extra grip that's just going on the outside of the firearm to make the firearm more, ergonomic for your hand, there's nothing unlawful about that, because even though the firearm itself may be designed to hold more, the standard capacity magazine may exceed 10 rounds, this would be no different than buying a new upper for it, a new upper slide, some new optics, any of that stuff, okay? This is not a magazine, so there's nothing unlawful about that. That's a good question. Savage Boxing, when until Washington State magazine ban gets overturned. Savage Boxing, thanks for joining us. You're probably a little, might be late to the party here, But we're going to be doing an interview with Joel Ard, who is the lead counsel in Sullivan v. Ferguson. That is the case in Western District of Washington. I'm doing the interview tomorrow at 10 a.m. So that means I likely am going to be able to get the video out maybe by Wednesday. So check Wednesday at noon. Might be the time it goes out, but there's going to be an interview. We're going to talk to him about what's going on in that case and try to get conceptualize a timeline of when things may happen so that you guys can get up to date on that. Those are great questions, and I'm going to ask straight from the horse's mouth tomorrow, okay? All right. John McElfresh just joined. So I'm wondering how they will repeal all of this new legislation they are passing that goes against the Supreme Court rulings. Okay, so what I think you're talking about, John, is do some of these new laws suddenly get flipped by the Bruin case? Not necessarily, okay? But now these new laws, if challenged, would be challenged by the new constitutional analysis that the Bruin court said we have to use. So that's how the new laws could be. Now, I did a video last week. It's talking about the waiting periods. If you guys remember when 1639 was passed in 2018, we added a bunch of waiting periods, okay? The California had done the same thing, shockingly, and it was challenged in a case, I think it was called Sylvester v. Becerra. And the Ninth Circuit had upheld the waiting periods, and they used that two-part balancing test. So, okay, waiting periods are constitutional. Well, now that two-part test that they used has been found to be improper. So the question is if you redid that case and you only used the one-part test that the Supreme Court said is the only test to use, would it stand constitutional muster now? That's the question. So are we going to see a litany of challenges on waiting periods, maybe the 1639 safety class, magazine bans, ammunition bans, certain platform firearm bans? Yes, you are most definitely going to see just a huge influx from appellate law firms around the country, those that are pro 2A. They're going to take up these cases. I mean, we got 2 lawsuits now in the state of Washington just on the magazine ban alone. Don't be surprised if you don't see some similar suit for House Bill 1705 on the untraceable firearms. So yes, that is what's going on there. And again, the magazine ban could easily end with the stroke of a pen from the Ninth Circuit. If the Ninth Circuit rehears Duncan v. Bonta and says under the one-part test, the only test that we can use, because that's what the Supreme Court said the law of the land was, okay? If that's what we use, then no, magazine bans are unconstitutional. Then congratulations to everyone in California. You don't even get a Freedom Week. You get your freedom back, at least in that part. You got a long way to go to get it all back. We who are in Washington rapidly trying to catch up with you, it would be one of the shortest-lived magazine bans in the history of the nation. Could that happen before the calendar year is out? Yes, it could. The Firearms Policy Coalition filed a motion to shorten time, which basically is telling the court, hey, case got remanded back. Don't set it on a normal calendar. Set it now. Let's go. We can decide this thing right this second. Supreme Court told you what you need to rule. And in some ways, I completely agree with their filings there. So that's really important. Yashiro Giyagi, would you be able to explain the Supreme Court's new method of using a historical perspective to analyze Second Amendment cases? The one-part test is this. When we look at the gun restriction, does it typically infringe upon activity which is normally protected by the Second Amendment, especially when we take a look at the text and history of the Second Amendment? So, why are magazine bans, might they be on a slightly different level than an AR ban? Well, we can both agree that if you ban magazines of certain capacity or you ban certain types of firearms, that is an activity which infringes upon the Second Amendment, okay? As defined by history and text, though, when we go back and we look, we see that there really is no history for magazine bans other than recently. When it comes to assault weapon bans, there is several different types of restrictions. There's the Gun Control Act of 1934, which outlawed semi-automatic weapons. Okay, actually, the National Firearms Act of 1934. Then there's the Gun Control Act of 1968, and then there's the infamous Brady assault weapon ban. I don't think it was the Brady bill, but it was the assault weapon ban. So there is some historical context. Okay, now how that compares with the rule of law that the Justice Scalia said, which is, hey, the Second Amendment protects the type of firearms that are in common use at the current time. Well, then obviously an AR would. But the idea behind the text and history is we go back and we take a look, has there ever historically been other jurisdictions that have allowed this, or our country has allowed this? And that was the problem with New York, is that when they went back and they said, look at the history of all of these crazy restrictions on carrying a firearm, they basically came to the conclusion that other than New York, no, there really isn't a history anywhere else. Okay. And that's why it's unconstitutional. James M. Well, weed is illegal federally. Oh, okay, we're getting into the weed issue. Yeah, listen. One of the biggest issues, if any of you guys are cannabis users, and you don't need to admit to me that you are, but if you are and you own firearms, that's an issue under federal law. If the federal government just redefined cannabis to where it should be, same with alcohol and tobacco, that problem is solved overnight. That problem is solved overnight. I believe that there's a political clout to do that, but unfortunately, this particular administration has become so ineffective in anything, they can't even get people to agree on legal weed, I'm sure. So, okay, RGO, this is a good question. Is there anything that can be done to protect anonymity when applying or holding a CPL in Washington State? Can a permit be applied for within a gun trust, like a suppressor or other strategy? RGO, no, that is not possible. It's a good question, but no, the individual needs to apply for the CPL. It is the individual who gets licensed. It's the individual who goes through the background check, and the individual who has to provide the address to assure that they live within the jurisdiction that's actually granting them the CPL. I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but that is it. Okay. And if I said NRA instead of NFA, you're right. It is the NFA. All right. John McElfresh, will the recent rulings possibly repeal the NFA and the Gun Control Act? I know that there are a lot of people out here in the YouTuberverse right now who believe that the Bruen case was suddenly going to undo the National Firearms Act of 1934 and the Gun Control Act of 1968 and any other piece of gun legislation. And I do not agree with that. I do not believe that the Bruen case has the potential to overthrow the NFA. I do not believe that the Bruen case has the ability or the potential to abolish the Gun Control Act of 1968. I do believe that the Bruen case has the ability to stop many of these more recent and more extreme gun-grabbing measures. Yes, I do. Now, I would also point out that most of those people who are pounding their chest on this are not lawyers. And you're not going to find many lawyers who believe that. Now, I know there are some out there, and they could be right. I mean, lawyers, we have a disagreement in opinions all the time. So that's my opinion on that. Okay, Christopher Brown. Why, when I tried to purchase a pistol through an FFL, that I had to contact the state trooper, and they told me as far as the state is concerned, I'm in the clear, but not on the Fed side. Okay, Chris Brown, check out the videos that we did on restoration, because here's what a lot of attorneys do. Getting you restored on the state level is pretty easy, can be done, but they neglect to make sure that that's reported to the state patrol. The state patrol then neglects to report it to NICS. You don't update in the federal system, or you have a type of offense that can be restored at the state level but cannot be restored at the federal level. That needs to be explained to you by your restoration attorney when they start the work, because if you get your rights restored on the state level, but you never pass a background check and never can buy a gun, you didn't really get your gun rights restored. Tony Gianodi. If my father-in-law gifted me a pistol he owned prior to moving to Washington, am I obligated to register it since the transfer doesn't require an FFL transfer? Nope. Good question. Probably I missed the question, Tony. That's why you asked it multiple times. I'm glad I got it to you. Tony, that transfer does not need to go through an FFL because of the familial relationship that you have. However, if your father-in-law no longer wants the firearm in his name, because somewhere there is a record of him purchasing it, then you do have to do an actual transfer. And the only way an FFL can do an actual transfer by law is they have to run the background check. Okay. So, but if you just leave it as is right now, as long as your father-in-law had a good reason to believe that you were otherwise lawfully allowed to possess a firearm, that is a perfectly legal familial transfer under 941-113. Okay. Yoshiro Giyaji, when traveling between U.S. states and its territories, are we allowed to transport our firearms, even if it is not legal within the state we are traveling through? We are always allowed, when traveling from the United States to the United States, any point A to point B in the United States, through the safe passage provision that if we store our firearms consistent with that, locked in the automobile or locked in luggage in a way that we cannot access them, then whether the firearms are legal or illegal in that state, we have a safe passage on our way through. Check that out. Federal safe passage provision. Okay. Daniel Casey, I do wonder if the non-collection of tax under the Hughes Amendment could be repealed. That, again, would be based on the West Virginia v. EPA case. Ethan Payne, Security Gun Club. Hey, you guys are the best range store in Washington State, hands down. By the way, I started working as part of the faculty over there, doing a class once a month. And this is what I do like about security. Yes, they are sponsoring a couple videos, but I'm not being paid for what I'm about to say here, okay? I'm not being paid by anything by security, actually. I just happen to do business with them, and I like them a lot. The programs that Jackson, the head trainer, the in charge of training over there, has put together is some of the best curriculum I've seen at any gun range anywhere in the state of Washington, because they are catering to whether you just bought your gun last month or you've been around guns your whole life, whether you want to just learn the very basic rules or some of the most advanced stuff imaginable. They got the curriculum all the way in between, covering everything. And like I said, ladies, if you want to get into firearms and you're looking for a little bit more approachable way to do it, check out their ladies only classes. I'm up there once a month teaching the laws of self-defense. So yeah, the educational component up there is outstanding. And candidly, the staff up there is pretty cool. Everyone I've met up there is great. So check them out if you guys can, please. Okay, I'm going to get a couple more questions in, and then we're going to talk about a couple things before we go. Does security offer private one-on-one training? Yes, they do. They have several instructors up there. Check it out. All right. Cheryl, I'm not going to answer any more questions. You got about 4 questions answered already here. And okay, here's a good question. G23. We're talking about NFA items that are in trust, and all parties have to be on the trust. Yeah, listen, real quick on NFA items, Title II firearms. If you guys are thinking about establishing a trust and you're going to put Title II firearms and non-Title II firearms in the same trust, I don't recommend that, because that gives the ATF access to all those firearms in that trust. I think you should establish 2 trusts, one for your NFA items, one for your non-NFA items. That's my opinion, okay? All right. Well, guys, listen, it is 8:03. We have 363 of you online. Yes, Ed Kemper, this does get saved, and it does go back onto the page so that you can watch this later. So if you missed anything earlier, we could do Chris Scott. Can my wife transfer a pistol to my sister without an FFL background check? That's an in-law relationship. Yes, you get to do that. Okay, so we get to do that. Okay, Ernie Guerrera, you're going to get the last question, and this is a good one. Can a person grow weed and not use weed and still own a firearm or concealed pistol license? Okay, this is a good question. The question on 4473, I think it's question 21D or something like that, is, are you an illegal user of or addicted to narcotics or any other controlled substances? If that is the question, check it out. It's in section 21 on form 4473. If you actually grew weed, didn't smoke weed, which would make you the first weed grower I ever met like that, but it's possible, right? I mean, I suppose you can have a winemaker who doesn't drink wine. Okay, but anyways, listen, if you grew weed, didn't ever use weed at all, could you own a firearm? Yeah, you could. Okay, because it's the users that are prohibited. That is a good question. I'm going to look into that a little bit more. You may have just given me a good idea for a video for the 10 weed growers in this state. The 2 weed growers in this state who actually don't smoke weed and want to own a gun. Listen, guys, it is a few minutes after 8 o'clock. I want to thank all of you for joining us live. We're going to do it again next Monday. I'll get the announcements out next month, I should say. The first Monday of the month, unless that's Labor Day. I think the first Monday may be Labor Day. If that's the case, we'll do it the week after. There's a lot of things going on with Washington gun law right now. We're going to get a lot of videos going on. We're doing a lot of videos on the national side because there's so much crap happening on the national side. Now, that does affect all of us here in Washington State, but I've been charting out some of the other topics that we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks. We're going to be starting to Jen Psaki circle back into some very specific Washington issues, including a video series on why I still think that Attorney General Ferguson is out for an AR ban, okay? And I know you're like, well, that could never stand constitutional muster. I agree completely, but I don't think that's going to stop our Attorney General. So I want to thank all of you guys and gals for sticking around with us for over an hour on a lovely night. You guys could all be doing something much cooler than hanging out with me, so I really appreciate it. We crossed over 60,000 subscribers this week, and it wouldn't be possible if were it not for all of you people who are kind enough to subscribe to the channel. And I know many of you have gone out there word of mouth. Hey, you got to check this channel out. Check these people out. They're really keeping us informed. And so I can't thank all of you enough. So keep watching the channel. Give me a call if you got any other questions. You can always contact us at WashingtonGunLaw.com or 425-765-0487. In the meantime, all of you enjoy the rest of your summer, and please stay safe. Take care.